If we could go ahead and do introductions. Faith, will you start us off?
I'm Faith Schulstrom, and I represent Frank Barbieri.
Kathy Gunlack, I represent Karen Brill.
Steve Sills representing Chuck Shaw.
Karen Marcus representing, Barbara McQuinn.
Sherry Brown representing Erica Whitfield.
Heather Canoes, Budget Director and Staff Liaison.
Mike Burke, CFO.
Leanne Evans, Treasurer.
Alicia Steiger, Principal, Sunrise Park Elementary, and the Division Chair for Elementary.
Karen Wetzel, Principal, Suncoast High School.
Do we have staff here today? And any public comments? Nope. Okay, so move over to approve the minutes from February 14th.
Move approval. Did you get in?
Do I have a second?
Password
Second by Faith. All those in favor, all those opposed, motion carries unanimously. That's how we do it at the county,
Good,
so
good.
we'll keep it going. Heather, you want to go ahead and do our budget development update?
Good morning, everybody. This is really could be our last meeting of the year. We were able to, even though the legislative session just started on March 3rd and is going to end on May 5th, or started on March 5th and is scheduled to end on May 3rd. We do have some budget proposals from both the House and Senate. The budget development that we have for this presentation is making sure that we balance on the most conservative approach, which you're going to see is going to be the House proposal. And so we're going to be looking for input from the committee for the report to the board, which would be at our next meeting. But we're going to get started with a legislative update, and this legislative update is purely focusing on those that have a budget impact. There are a lot of bills, and there's a lot more in the bills as well that impact specifically the academics, but we're going to focus on those that have a budget impact. Since the legislative session is still underway, hasn't been final decision, so we're going to have to go through both what the Senate proposal is and the House proposal. In some cases they are similar, but we're going to start with Senate Bill 7070 and House Bill 7075. The focus of this bill is primarily on school choice. And the key takeaway with this bill is the Family Empowerment Scholarship. What that is school vouchers. And it's being able to use FEFP dollars in order to attend private schools. So that is the most significant change. It is supported by the governor, the Senate, as well as the House. And that potentially could have a significant impact going forward. This isn't the first time that vouchers were proposed, and the last time they were proposed, they were ultimately deemed unconstitutional, and so we'll have to wait and see what happens. With the House bill, the one difference with the House bill is it lowers the, or I guess you could say it raises the income threshold to qualify for the voucher, and so that means potentially more families would be able to qualify.
Just like to mention that the last time we went through this voucher, the makeup of the Florida Supreme Court was much different. So Governor DeSantis has been able to appoint, we've had some turnover, and the thought is that the next go around that these vouchers would stand with the current court. That's, it's speculation on my part, but there's been a lot of coverage in the media about that.
Is there a direct line between the funding for public schools and the amount that goes into here? Is that taken out of the public school funding?
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's different from the tax credit because it's direct funding, correct? It doesn't go through how they've been able to do it now is the tax credit. It's
Correct.
not a direct.
What we've seen to date was the corporate tax scholarships. Mm-hmm. And we've had McKay scholarships, which on the ESC front, which would be traditional funding passing through. But this would be FEFP dollars straight from the education, and it's just a question of, I think, how many. I think they're starting with about 15,000 students statewide, which is not a huge number considering we have 2.8 million students statewide, but the thought is it will grow over time.
The next area to highlight is that both the House and the Senate are aligned with the governor's proposal to take the Best and Brightest teacher program, teacher and principal allocation, which is currently funded outside of the FEFP, and move it to the FEFP. So when we look at the increases in funding and per student funding from all the proposals, the governor, the House, and the Senate, we have to take that into consideration because it really is not a true increase, because it's just they're changing it from being funded outside of FEFP to now being included within the FEFP. And then there's also some changes in here, proposed changes, and this is right now looks like only in the Senate proposal, that for those projects that are funded through local capital outlay millage, they would be exempt from needing approval from DOE for the projects, and then also increasing and adjusting the cost per student station. The next two bills are 7030 and 7093, and those relate primarily to school safety. And with the school safety, the 2 points to highlight here is that they are proposing, both the House and the Senate, having a little more flexibility on if there is any increase in safe school spending, that we could use it for anything that's allowable under the statute, with priority given to new school officers. Right now, the statute says any new funding has to be used for new officers. So that at least provides some flexibility with if we have increased funding. And then also wanted to highlight, this bill is putting in, or proposing to put in through both the Senate and the House, fines and penalties on the superintendent as well as possibly the school board, that if we don't meet the requirements or submit reports on time, potentially their salaries, we could withhold their salary, and other fines could be applied as well. The next bill is the Senate Bill 1028 and House Bill 7123, which is under taxation. This one could have the most significant impact. It's proposing that we share, that all districts share the voted millage with charter schools proportionately. And so that one is a significant concern.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, so this was a big topic. This is kind of late breaking. It's just been in the last couple of days. And last night our school board approved a call to action. So we're going to be putting out some materials just to try to educate the community and let the taxpayers know in Palm Beach County what they voted for is in jeopardy. Palm Beach County is kind of unique, and it's the legislature. This issue really came out of Miami-Dade, where in Miami it wasn't quite as clear what the intent of the school board was when they went to the voters. And the representative who's put the bill forward is from Miami-Dade County, and they felt like there was some deception around the issue of charters were in or not. But now all districts are getting kind of swept up in this, and Palm Beach County is unique in that we were the only district out of like the 20 districts that have a levy that specifically said, in the ballot language, it was for non-charter district schools. So our lobbyist has been busy. He testified to the House Committee, Appropriations Committee earlier this week, and is trying to make that point that you can't paint us all with the same brush. You need to look at what the voters, the will of the voters in Palm Beach County. So far, that the message hasn't really gotten through. The other thing that's really kind of strange about this is the retroactive nature of it.
That's what I was going to ask about.
It's effective July 1st, 2019, and on any money collected. Now, so our voters approved it back in November 2018 under the existing law. It's strange to change a law and then, you don't change a law and then go back and start arresting people for their behavior before the law. But that's probably not the best example, but it just seems really strange that they would make this a retroactive type thing and put us in conflict with what the voters approved. So we're going to be reaching out. I know we'll be reaching out to our teachers, different community groups, and urging people to contact our legislators and try to at least point out the situation we have here in Palm Beach County, where 72.37% of voters supported this, knowing full well that charters were excluded.
Is there, question, is there like a specific message, like at least carve out Palm Beach County? Or are you trying to kill the whole bill? Which,
No, there is specific message. One, we've got the document that was on the board agenda. We can maybe pull it up here today and get that to the committee. There was 2 points. The second point was mainly that it should not be retroactive, that if that's what they want to do, then, do it going forward. So maybe we might be faced with this in 4 years from now in the next referendum. I think the main point was just that the will of the voters in Palm Beach County was, to exclude charter schools and to respect that.
right, but isn't Palm Beach County already being sued by a charter school for?
Yes.
Okay.
Actually, we have two lawsuits.
I'm just trying to figure out, if it's illegal, how can they impose something that's illegal and on a county? And so I don't know if the board is going to litigate that or something, but that's for down the road. Sorry.
That would be, yeah,
I think
if we don't have any
a carve-out of Palm
success
Beach
at the
County
legislative front.
might be an easier message for the legislature, since it's very clear in the language.
Yeah, this could be, you could argue this would be unconstitutional, what they're about to try to do here. We've made a commitment. We're busy. We're ready to spend the money. We've negotiated with our teachers. We have an agreement on how to pay out the supplements. So the train is on the tracks.
And if charters are eligible, do they have to follow the intent of the voters regarding the ways it's spent?
There was an amendment, initially no, but there was an amendment added this week that would require that they spend it in the same manner that's spelled out in the ballot language.
So it would go to
It should go to
the same purpose?
same purposes, yes.
Okay, so with the next bill is House Bill 5, discretionary sales surtax. And the main takeaway from this is that any levy for discretionary sales surtax would require a 2/3 approval by the voters. And so we do have
So that affects us too.
that.
Right.
Yeah, right, correct.
Did it change last year to 60% or the year before, or for sales surtax? It was something else?
I don't think anything passed. I think
It
there's been
didn't- it was
different.
proposed
They've
at
floated
different times, so
proposals,
yeah.
yes.
Hi, Jackie.
And then the next one is House Bill 15, the Government Fiscal Transparency Act. The highlight there is most of what was in this bill we're already doing. It's adding some more transparency around when we would issue debt. We have the homestead exemptions. And some of these bills really don't have much traction, but since we're in the middle of the legislative session, we wanted to make sure that you're aware of them. So there was the proposal with the homestead exemptions to exempt certain individuals over the age of 65 meeting certain criteria. This could potentially have an impact of a loss of revenue to the district of $30 million. So this could potentially have a significant impact. Senate Bill 1434 is the Florida Education Finance Program. It's not a very detailed bill, and we haven't seen it really progress much. But what it would require is that we spend at least 80% of our funding in the classroom. There's not enough information to say really what qualifies as in the classroom. So that could range from, if it's strictly just classroom teachers, none of the instructional support, we would be around 69-70%. With instructional support is an additional 8%. So either way, I mean, we put a lot in the classrooms and we would be below that 80% threshold. And so that would also require, pushing additional funds into the classroom, which was the proposal during the election by Governor DeSantis.
No Senate companion?
No House companion right now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And it really hasn't
Gone anywhere?
No, it hasn't gone anywhere. We haven't received much additional detail on it. Right now, the way the bill's written, you can interpret it many ways as to what you would actually include within the 80%.
And not an equal requirement for charters?
I don't know if it would, I don't.
Charters were included in it.
Yeah, typically. It's,
And then we had a lot of discussion at the last meeting about the district cost differential, the DCD. It does look like that has been delayed until fiscal year 21. There was a report that was ordered. The report was released. It didn't have any impacts by district. The proposal is to look at the wage index across the counties, but there's a lot more that goes into it than just looking at wages. And I think it's probably likely what they found when they went through that review. So now the Office of Economic and Demographic Research, EDR, has been tasked with coming up with what that allocation would be in a methodology by January 1st, 2020. So it looks like at least that we were able to push that off for another year.
You describe these as bills not currently getting much traction. But if we go back to the initial bill we discussed about distribution among charter schools, given the attitude of the legislature over the last several years, I'd imagine that has significant traction. Is that accurate?
Those do.
No, I know that.
Yeah, it was
I'm just trying to differentiate.
That one-
That
Yes.
first,
Yeah.
that first set of bills, I would think have significant traction.
You are correct.
Yeah.
There is, it's a serious threat, and it's got
77.
support by the leadership in both the Senate and the House.
Yeah, the first two that I went through, the school choice and the school safety, those have been discussed at length within the committees. Those are pursuing along the path. There are some disagreements that they are going to have to work out through conference. But on the main points, the House and the Senate agree. It's really the additional ones that around the fiscal transparency, the homestead exemptions, those are the ones where those haven't really received that much traction right now. There also is, other bills over fiscal transparency. Our district has been very transparent. I mean, we do comply with the requirements that are within those bills. We might have to add some charts and graphs, but we do have the information out there and available. I mean, that is one thing that is very different with Florida. We are very transparent with how districts specifically spend our money, where it's going.
I'm wondering with these and other things, is the kind of overreach to, or it seems to me overreach of the state to be in every local issue endemic, or are there just individuals who are have little nits that they're picking?
I think it's pretty prevalent. I mean, just from, I think the League of Cities has had their battles with local control. I don't know the county, but
Yeah.
no, it seems to be a real trend and a kind of a constant attack on
Yeah, it never used to be
local
this
control.
bad. It's just every year it gets worse. And I don't know what bone they got to pick or who did something to them, but it's just gotten worse. We used to be a lot more successful in stopping this stuff, but not anymore.
But legislation is considering what you can plant in your yard and how you trim your trees, and things that have
No
always
plastic
been
straw beds.
local and, and things, so. And some of the transparency things. So.
I just read about the suntan ingredients. Like Key West, for good reason, was trying to ban, and now the state wants to not allow them to ban that.
Right.
That
Plastic
just doesn't make
straws and
sense.
bags and things, it's coming up and things, so.
A lot of them have financial ties to what they're doing. And you couldn't do it in a local government. You would be in big trouble, but they can do it legislatively. We've seen it with the charter schools, how many have financial ties to the charters.
And it just seems to me that it's not always looking out for the public welfare, but it is for maybe some individual.
So now getting to the actual proposed increases in per student funding. Now this is statewide. The governor is in the middle at 3.65%. The Senate is the highest at 4.71%, and the House is at 2.26%. But it's really not a true increase because, like I said, the Best and Brightest is included in the FY20 numbers, but it's not included in FY19. So now we're waiting on where are we actually going to end up. We do think it will be somewhere in between the House and the Senate, but actually closer to the House version is
We
what
get
we're
like a
anticipating.
brief summary of what Best and Brightest is and what it does.
The Best and Brightest Teacher and Principal Scholarship Program is what it's called, and it's based on the highest. There's 3 different bonus amounts. There's a bonus amount based on the SAT scores of the individual.
Okay, it's that program.
It's that program. And then they also added in, for those that don't qualify with the SAT score, they can also qualify if they're effective or highly effective. And then there's different levels within the bonus. And then the principal receives a bonus based on the number of Best and Brightest teachers in their school. And then there's certain other requirements that they have to meet. And we've just recently passed through $20 million, including charter schools, for those who are eligible, both teachers as well as principals that were eligible for this program. It's a bonus, so it is not FRS eligible.
The other problem is it changes every year. So this year, from what I've read, is more, quote, classroom teachers. So if your guidance counselors come in and out of that, other teachers come in and out of the umbrella. And so this year they're removing some from underneath that umbrella that would have previously qualified. So you can't count on it because legislatively they change it every year, and they change the amounts and the criteria. And there's a big difference between the House and the Senate version. The Senate version is the one with the 3 levels. The House version is much different.
Right, yeah, the House, they're looking at changing the Best and Brightest program altogether. What I went through is what the process
Senate,
is right
yeah.
now. There is consideration, I think it was the Senate, getting rid of the test,
ACT.
the ACT, SAT altogether, having it strictly based on whether they're effective or highly effective, and then growth within the school.
So-
But if you go back and look at that, I mean, how they're funding it, and if you look at the number of teachers that would actually be eligible, they would not be able to receive the bonus that they're proposing. It would be significantly reduced.
So I see where you've said it's not a true increase because the Best and Brightest is in there. Do we have a sense of how much additional is in there for safety and security? It seems, that's really important, but that doesn't, it impacts the children in keeping them safe, but in terms of improving their teaching and learning, it doesn't have the impact that we would want to have the increase address.
Correct. So what we do is we actually back out the increase when we look at, we're going to walk through, this is statewide, what is the impact for Palm Beach County specifically? The House is really not increasing the safe schools allocation or the mental health allocation. The Senate is. So we have to back that out because we have to use that for safety and security. We can't use it for employee raises. We can't use it to add additional staff that don't qualify under what that categorical funding allows. So we walk through it, and so let's, I guess, get to that. Here is, we've seen this before. There's a lot of numbers on here, but it's taking those FEFP numbers statewide and applying it to Palm Beach County. So the first column is the third calculation, which is what we have right now, where we stand. We're hoping to get the fourth calculation, should be coming out soon. The second column is the governor's proposal, which was released on February 1st. Then we have the Senate proposal, which was released on April 3rd. And the House proposal was released on March 21st. I'm going to start there with the first row, row 1, and you can see our increase in enrollment, and this is district-wide, is projected to be around 600 FTE. We were fortunate this year in Palm Beach County that we did have some minor growth in enrollment. We had an increase of approximately 400 FTE district-wide. But there were some districts to our south that actually had declining enrollment. So we're seeing that enrollment growth that we did have the past few years is really starting to slow. The next one to look at is, we talked about the district cost differential. So their calculation for the district cost differential is based on the current calculation. It's not assuming any change, and it's pretty similar. It's a slight decrease, but it's still a 4% bump based on our cost of living adjustment. When we go down to row 5, that's the base student allocation. That's the funding that gives us the most flexibility, or where we have the most flexibility to spend. We can see with the House proposal, it's an increase of $38 per student. The Senate proposal would be an increase of $154 per student. And the governor's proposal is, a little bit in the middle there at 52. But we're really going to focus on the House and the Senate. So there is a significant difference in the base student allocation. And like I said, that's where we want to see the increase because that's where we have the most flexibility with the spending. And then to the question on safe schools, if you go down to row 10, that's the safety and security. You can see that the House proposal is really pretty much flat at an increase of $351,000, but the Senate proposal is adding $4.8 million. Also let's go down to row 18. I didn't talk about it earlier, but the Senate proposal has a new categorical that they're creating called the Turnaround Supplemental Services Allocation, and that's additional funding in order to help support schools that are identified as being in turnaround. So based on our district, we would be eligible for $2 million, but that would be for specific schools for specific purposes. Like they would tell us how we would be able to spend that money. And then the next one, row 19, is the mental health allocation. Again, you can see the House pretty much stayed flat, while the Senate has a proposed increase of $2 million. And then finally, row 20 is the best and brightest. And you can see that the third calculation, there's nothing because it's not funded through FEFP. It's funded through outside of the FEFP program as a state grant. And then you can see with the House proposal is at $19 million, and the Senate proposal is at $16 million. Looking at the required local effort, what both proposals are also doing is, again, rolling back the required local effort, giving us credit only for the increase in new construction. So it's pretty much holding the RLE steady. There is we are expecting an increase in property values. It's 5.6%, I believe is the proposed increase, which seems reasonable when we talk to the county. So we do see an increase in our discretionary millage of the 0.748 mils of $8 million. So looking at going back and thinking of the enrollment district-wide increase of 600 students, we're looking at pretty much splitting that increase with charter schools. So half of that increase would go to district schools, approximately, and about 300 increase in expected in charter school growth. The board just did approve new charter schools to open, so we do expect to see some growth in charter schools. So if we come down to what our actual, after taking into consideration the increase in the pass-through to charter schools, the House proposal, we're looking at an increase of $37.4 million. And the Senate proposal, we're looking at an increase of $64.4 million. And what does that mean? So percentage-wise for us, including the best and brightest, the House proposal would be a $204 increase per student. The Senate would be a $362 increase per student. But if we back out the best and brightest and we back out the safe schools and all those additional categoricals, the Senate proposal goes from $362 per student down to $227 per student. And the House proposal goes from $204 per student down to $102 per student. So it turns it pretty much, for the House proposal, it puts it in half. So from 2.6% down to 1.32%. And with the Senate proposal from 4.62% down to just a little under 3%.
So just some recent history here. In the last 3 years, the House budget position has prevailed. And right now, we're on Monday, the House and Senate are expected to begin their conferencing process where they go in and kind of negotiate things out. In the last 3 years, the Senate caved almost immediately when it came to K-12, and we saw the House funding come through. There's some hope this year. We have a new Senate president who has said he's supportive of K-12 education, and we're hoping there's more of a true negotiation and the Senate fights a little harder maybe to bring their funding proposals forward. But if you're just looking at what happened in the last 3 years, there's Heather's very smart to be conservative about it at this point. But I do have some hope that maybe we'll see a little more out of the Senate and that they'll hold a little stronger. But that's just kind of what we're hearing as far as coming out of Tallahassee. But they need to prove it.
So now I wanted to take the net district funding of the $37 million for the House and the $64 million from the Senate and say, okay, what does that mean now to our district, that increase, and how we're going to actually spend those funds. So looking at the House proposal, which is how we're building the budget so that we can be the most conservative, we have to take into consideration that the legislature approved an increase in the Florida retirement rate, and the impact to our district is $2.5 million, so that has to come off the top. We also have to take out of consideration the increase in the Safe Schools allocation, categorical, as well as mental health, and that for the House doesn't have much of an impact because they didn't really have an increase, but for the Senate allocation, that's $6.9 million that we would have to back out. We'd also have to take out the Best and Brightest because that's $19 and $16 million that's set aside for a specific program. Then we have to look at our increase in our revenue because we have to make sure that we have to remain in compliance with the school board policy, maintain our contingency at 3%. So with the different increases in revenue, that results in a different increase in the contingency. So ranging from $1.4 million in the House proposal to $2.3 million in the Senate proposal. We also have many bargaining groups that are effective January 1st. So we have to take into consideration a whole year of what that salary increase would look like for them. So that's another $2 million that we have to take into consideration. Even though we only have a small increase in expected students of approximately 350, that does equate to 20 positions, not just teachers, but that's teachers, ELL support staff, ESE support staff, school-based support staff. So that 20 encompasses everything in addition to teachers. So that's about $1.4 million. And then we always want to set aside a employee salary bargaining reserve equal to the increase that we're getting in state funding. So we back out the Best and Brightest as well as the state mandates. So that's where it's getting back to the 1.32% for the House and the nearly 3% for the Senate proposal. And this is where you can see the most significant difference between the two proposals, because with the House proposal, we're able to set aside $13.2 million, whereas the Senate proposal, we're able to set aside nearly $30 million for a salary reserve. So although we're planning for the worst, we're hoping for the best with the Senate proposal, because that would be just significant. Comparing to the last several years, the state has not funded us at that level for the past several years. And what we're going to walk through today are the school and department budget investments. We went through all the school investments, and so we're now going to go through all of the investments, including the department investments. They total $6.9 million. The board also has two direct reports. That's the Inspector General and the General Counsel. Those two departments have staff requests that will be presented to the board to see whether they have support and approval. Those total approximately $300,000. And then how were we able to pay for these increases? We did have some realignments and savings. Our workers' comp rate, we haven't seen an increase as what was anticipated by the change in the law. So we were actually able to increase the workers' comp rate. That's about $2.5 million. We've also been able to hire officers and replace those contracted security officers that we were hiring, those contracted officers at a higher rate. So that should generate savings of approximately $2 million. And then what we talked about in the last meeting, realignments within ELL. So for the investments that we made within ELL, we had already made changes within our English language learners allocation. That's approximately $2 million. And then there were also some realignments and savings within the departments, positions that they decided to not fill, getting rid of one director position and adding another director position. And those totaled about $300,000. So all in all, that we were able to identify equal amount of realignments and savings in order to fund these new initiatives. So with the House budget, that puts us at a slight deficit of $2.6 million. And the Senate budget proposal has us at a slight surplus of $3.3 million. But there are still a lot of variables out there that we need to consider. And so you've seen this chart before. It really doesn't change much from year to year. I do expect that it will change slightly when we have our next meeting. We're working on getting everything within our budget system. We're changing how we report school police activity just to make sure that it's more clear, making sure we're allocating all the costs to the school sites. So I do expect the amount in schools is going to increase slightly and the departments will decrease, because we do have departments that are providing that oversight and overhead. So we are changing with the growth within the school police department. It made sense to put them in a separate fund, track them separately so we can easily identify what we're spending on school security. So by the next meeting, I do expect these numbers to change slightly. Not significantly, but I do expect them to change slightly. And this is not, when we're saying 74% on schools, and when you're looking at the school budget, that's including everything, including administrative staff. It's not just the teachers. And another important item to highlight is the referendum represents 10% of our total general fund budget now. Our general fund budget is $2 billion, so the referendum represents 10% of that.
It's huge.
It's significant. Mm-hmm. So what variables do we still have out there? We have to get the actual approved legislative budget. That is the most significant, is what the actual budget that is passed. There are competing priorities in Tallahassee with still the impact of the hurricane as well as environmental issues. The state really doesn't want to use their reserve dollars. They still want to put and increase their reserves, and so that's going to be part of the discussion as well. What our actual enrollment increase is. Are we going to see growth in Palm Beach County? So that will impact our budget. We always talk about every year the number of schools identified as low 300. We did go down this year from 27 to 20, but sometimes we do see that kind of flip-flop, back and forth. But we did make a stress this year that we didn't want schools to just fall off, so we did provide additional supports to try to wean them off rather than pull those supports out altogether. The legislative session, they always seem to give us more unfunded mandates, so that's somewhat expected, but we have to know what they are. And what the actual tax roll is another, that has a significant impact. And then also at the federal level, what's going to happen to our grants? Are we going to see a decrease or hopefully an increase within Title I or some of our other large federal programs?
So speaking of the actual tax roll, I see a lot of building in downtown West Palm. Is that going to affect? Do we have any idea what the tax roll is going to be?
We do have an idea on the tax roll, but whether those specific buildings are in there, I can't tell you. So that's something I'll find out, and by the next meeting, I'll have what's included within there.
I don't mean what building, I was
Well,
really
no, but whether
asking
they're
about whether we're
looking at
having
the-
a significant or a good increase, or is it close? Or
Well, it's 5.6% is the proposed increase in the property values, which was what was given to us. So it's,
Yeah, we need to check on those condos, though, down there right off of Phillips Point. They should have an impact.
and we did, that was the estimate from the state, and we did, Ms. Evans reached out to her contact at the property appraiser, who said that that does seem like a reasonable increase of the 5.6%. Because at times, other years, this state has been much more optimistic as to what our increase in property values would be. This year, it seems to be more in line with what the county is expecting.
We've reached out, and that's about what we're going with. Like 5 to 6% is our estimates at this point.
So as a result of the passage of the referendum, we're able to make investments of over $200 million this year. And within that $200 million, I am including the $50 million of the over 700 fine arts teachers that we're already funding. The reason why I included those in here is because if the referendum didn't pass, we would be looking at a nearly $50 million shortfall. So if you want to look at just strictly what are our new investments, it's $160 million, which, I mean, we can only continue to say thank you to the voters for approving that referendum, for us to be able to make these significant impacts and investments within our school sites. So we're going to start with our first strategic theme, because we aligned all of our investments with the district strategic plan. The first is effective and relevant instruction to meet the needs of all students. So that's a total investment of $163 million. Of over $100 million of that is for teacher recruitment and retention supplements. For us to be able to make an investment of that level, I know it's been a priority of the committee since it started that we have to invest more within our teachers. And with the passage of the referendum, we're able to do that and invest over $100 million is what's anticipated. We're also continuing to fund over the 700 art, music, PE, choice, and career academy teachers. We talked about at our last meeting the increase in the fine arts non-salary allocation, as well as all the changes we were making within ELL. So those are all the school-based initiatives. For the department, they're adding a manager of equity and access in order to support all that work with equity and access. Also adding this is within the assessments department, 2 instructional specialists to support testing, making sure that the information and data is reported correctly, as well as providing supervision and oversight to the new testing coordinator that's being added to the high schools, which I have on the second slide, and I'll explain why I have it on that slide versus this slide when we get there. And then also we continue to each year see an increase in dual enrollment. So we're increasing dual enrollment as well as additional costs for a turnaround program that we currently have 6 schools participating in. So it's additional costs related to that turnaround program. The next theme is positive and supportive school culture.
Heather, can I just ask on the teacher supplements, because they're supplements and not bonuses, they count towards FRS. Is that accurate?
That is correct.
And a quick question about the dual enrollment. I know there's a proposed change in the law about that with private schools, charter schools, and homeschooling. Do you see, and I couldn't figure out, it's an unfunded mandate from what I could tell. Who's going to pick that up? Is it going to be the community colleges, or is it going to be the school district, or do you know at this point?
I don't know for certain. I can tell you that how it works now is we do fund the dual enrollment. We have an agreement with with Palm Beach State College, so we do pay them for those services, as well as the instructional materials as well. And it is more than what we're receiving.
Because it looks like there's a pretty significant change in the program. I don't know. And that was my question to some folks in Tallahassee is who's picking up the tab.
Yeah, and there was a lot of discussion too about dual enrollment compared to AP and IB and which one is more beneficial for the student. And, you know, I agree, you know, which one are they going to get the credit for? So that should go into their decision as well. But it was hard to tell from the discussion when I was watching it yesterday. I can only go by what we're doing right now.
Okay.
But we are seeing, every year, we're seeing an increase in dual enrollment of at least $250,000 a year. So the next strategic theme is positive and supportive school culture, and that really is where all of our mental health and school security falls under. That's an increase of $45.9 million. That's adding the student behavioral health or that mental health position, one per school, expanding the co-located services, adding 40 additional school psychologists, adding extra duty days in order to provide additional supports to the students. The testing coordinator, adding one per school. The reason why I added it here, because the purpose of adding the testing coordinator to the high schools was to free up the time of the counselor so that they could actually be a counselor. So that was why I included it under positive and supportive school culture. We're also adding additional school counselors at the middle school and 110 officers within the schools and one security monitor at each of the secondary schools. I do also have to manage expectations that it does take a significant amount of time to hire all of these positions. So they are out in the budgets, but for the 75 officers that we hired this current year, we're currently at that they've hired 71 out of the 75. But it took almost the whole entire school year to be able to do that. So we have been very clear with the principals to say we have added these positions are out there, but it's possible that they will not be filled for potentially the whole entire school year. But that will take time, and they will be placed and prioritized based on schools' needs. So our next initiative is talent development. So that's total investment of $400,000. It's adding a director for non-instructional recruitment because we're seeing, especially in transportation, maintenance, difficulty in hiring the staff. So really getting somebody in there who can focus on those non-instructional jobs that are important, very important as well. And they were actually gave up a director in another area in order to help fund this. Adding a manager for additional coaching and support, and also funding additional alternative certifications. Under Initiative 4, High Performance Culture, an investment of $200,000, and that is for two Broad residents to help us to continue to improve and focus on our performance management, documenting policies, and making sure that we continue to be high performing in the operational and academic divisions.
Okay. How many employees do we have?
It would be 22,000. Over 22,000.
$408,000 for talent development seems like a really low amount. And it might be just, and I know we're stretched in everything, but to think about that as we move forward. I mean, we hire the best we can, but if we don't invest in people's talent development, then that's not so cool.
And other initiatives that have been implemented in prior years that are continuing are a teacher mentor supplement, so that has been something that in exit interviews with the teachers that they didn't feel as if they were supported, so adding a teacher mentor, also adding additional funds for recruitment and advertisement. So although we agree with a budget our size, the amount we should spend more, although it's always difficult.
Those are the hardest ones to justify.
Correct. Correct. I mean, because we don't have a lot of extra funds laying around, and so we do agree, and I know that the chief of HR would fully agree with what you're saying, that we need to invest more.
Heather, I have a question regarding the school psychologist.
Yes?
Is that, I really believe we need those psychologists, but my question to you is that number driven from the need to provide more direct services to students, and just to do testing, perform testing on students? Where's that number derived from, the need for it? I mean, we do need them.
The
but I
reason
just
is
understand.
because right now, it seems like the school psychologists don't have enough time to do anything else but testing.
Right.
So that's why we're adding additional in order to be able to provide additional services over and above just testing the students. We also are investing in extra duty days over the summer months to try to get rid of the backlog of the testing over the summer. And that way, that will free up time of the school psychologists during the school year. And so we also made an investment for this upcoming year that they will work over the summer to try to clear up that backlog of testing. But the priority and the reason for adding those additional school psychologists was to provide additional supports, not for testing purposes.
Good.
So now we also have operational initiatives that don't fall within any of the strategic themes, although are necessary in order to support the overall advancement of the strategic plan. So we have the general manager, adding a general manager position for custodial services, as well as a technician to help support that large number of custodians that are decentralized at each of the school sites. Currently, we don't require principals to purchase uniforms for custodians. We know that some do, but we want to require and have uniforms for all custodians. It also is a safety issue that you can identify who is on the campus and that person is a custodian. We have seen an increase in EEO cases, and because of that increased workload, adding an EEO coordinator. And as you can see, the legislative session, we're expecting the next year to be even more difficult, so we're expecting to have need increased funding in order to support the board's legislative priorities.
On the legislative issue, you know, there was a lot of publicity around the state throwing out, our version of Common Core. So that means there's going to be a whole curriculum like rewrite, and it's going to be we're going to need some more legislative support throughout that process.
So those are all the school and department budget investments. For the two direct reports to the board, the Inspector General is requesting one senior auditor to audit the sales tax projects. Now that they're underway, ensuring that the district is complying with all established policies and procedures. And the General Counsel is looking to add 2 attorneys, one as a result of the increased work due to the sales tax referendum, and the second because of the increased workload related to not only charter schools, but just general litigation in general. So that totals $300,000. So what were we able to do this year? We were able to invest over $100 million in teacher recruitment and retention supplements, and an additional $13 million in a salary reserve, with the potential to go up to nearly $30 million if we were to get closer to the Senate proposal. I think that this will, probably be the only year that we'll be able to say that we can make this level of investment in district employees. And I know that it was, like I said, a priority not only of the committee, but of the board to really invest in our teachers. And we have to, again, thank the voters for passing the referendum. This year, we were also able to fully fund all of the school police department requests, add 170 school behavioral health positions, 40 school psychologists, and expand mental health. So we've been fortunate to make significant investments in our school sites, and it is due to the passage of the referendum.
Now, those 3 positions, the school behavioral health, the school psychologist, and the contracted services, are those going to be overseen by the new assistant or whatever?
Assistant Superintendent of Wellness.
Okay. And that didn't increase, you still got a benefit or of the realignment? Did a position come from somewhere else?
Well, not all of the, yes, there was another position. I did not include that within here because since the Assistant Superintendent of Wellness was actually set up in FY19, it's not included, but they used the Assistant Superintendent of Equity and Access, and it was a whole lot longer name than that, but that is the position that was used for the wellness position.
And so the psychologist will be moved out of ESE into that department?
They will. And there's a new Director of Mental Health position, which is where I believe the school psychologist would be reporting to.
As will the behavioral health people?
Right, they're on yes, that's within the Safe Schools.
Okay, that's what I thought, but.
Yeah, but that's going to fall within the Assistant Superintendent of Wellness too.
Safe Schools will?
I believe so.
Okay.
I have to go back and look at the.
It will.
Yeah.
Okay. I was just, it needs to be so coordinated and it needs to be one, to me,
Yes, it's a lot of
person in charge.
resources, and we want to make sure to align. I know there was a lot of focus and time dedicated by leadership on making sure that we were aligning not only the new positions we have, but the existing resources we have to make sure that we're not doing duplicative work and that everything is being aligned for the same mission, that the schools receive the same message. So once they do have the Assistant Superintendent of Wellness, once that person is hired, I think we'll be able to define more as to what the process is.
And do you see the need on the contracted services lessening once you get all the people on board?
No, my understanding is that the contracted services it's providing a different service. So the mental health, the school behavioral health position, I thought Dr. Robinson explained it really well by calling that position more of a triage position. You know, they're coming in, they're identifying, they're not actually providing the counseling and therapy. And so having these co-located services, they could have the potential, which is still up to, the parent has to sign off on it as to whether that's actually what they want, but to actually do that and have that service, take advantage of that service on the actual school site by having the person on the school site. The mental health person does not report to, the contracted or co-located services does not report to the school. They still report to their organization. So I don't know if you have one, if you could explain.
I do have one. I share one with we share one with Eagles Landing, which is right next door to my elementary school. So she is there 2 full days and a half day. And the term is really basically they want them to do 6 to 8 sessions. We have the parents obviously contact the co-located provider before we make that happen so they can talk about what goal we want to set. And then after that 8 sessions, if they need more, they then refer them out to a more intensive type therapy. And it's been very beneficial. I'm excited to have somebody full-time next year. In addition, from my understanding, we're still going to have the co-located, but we're also going to have the behavioral health position. And it's made a world of difference, especially at the elementary level.
We had tremendous feedback from all the principals saying that it has been a great resource having the co-located service. And that was one question they asked. They said, are you now taking away that co-located position because of the school behavioral health? And we said no. And they, again, and I don't know that you'll believe when I say this, everybody is just so thankful for the passage of the referendum, for the resources that we were able to invest in the schools. The principals are so excited to be able to have these resources to really be able to service the students.
Oh, there's a huge need.
Yeah, at the elementary level, especially if you're not title, it's you and your assistant principal. So if you have any sort of mental health issues going on, it's one of you is dealing with it sometimes for multiple hours a day. So to have a person that's consistent, that can do the check-ins, that can really make sure that we're developing a plan and working with the teachers, it's really been very beneficial.
and has the skills.
Heather,
Yes, yes,
I
yes.
have a question. You mentioned a lot of areas that, was it the Assistant Superintendent of Wellness or, okay. Right now, I know you said you've been working on the alignment of all of this. What's the umbrella? So that's not completed yet? Because there are many,
No, it is completed. The
Okay.
whole org chart is completed as to
So-
which departments and will be reporting to that
Okay.
Assistant Superintendent of Wellness. But it is, I was stating it more from, it is a brand-new division. So once they have an Assistant Superintendent of Wellness, they now have to develop and define the role of that division because it's new. It's never existed before. So they have the outline, they have the departments and who's going to be reporting to them, but there's so much information that's coming from Tallahassee as to the regulations and what information we need to be reporting on students and tracking on students. There's a lot that's going to go into that position. So there is still some work once they do hire that person, since it is a new division.
it's kind of like just a little bit confusing, which department is going under.
Well, I can provide the org chart for that.
Right.
I can
Actually,
prov-
that's what my
Yeah.
question is, if we can get that.
Yeah, I was, the superintendent, Dr. Fenoy, dedicated a full day. He had like the whole leadership team come in to really dig into that issue. And, you know, we used we laid out basically all the resources that are currently going into anything related to student wellness and mental health and all that, and laid it all out. And that's where we did the work, and he helped develop, you know, the job descriptions for this, like assistant superintendent of student wellness. And we had bits and pieces in different departments, you know, safe schools, ESE, student services, and the effort was really to pull all that together. And so I think there's a good plan in place. You know, we took those job descriptions to the board, and now they're in the process of recruiting for that assistant superintendent. I think they've still got to fill the director of mental health, but there's a plan laid out, and all that's being through this development of next year's budget. Then all the department resources are being aligned as well and brought in under that, like, kind of one big umbrella.
But you do know which departments right now are coming under it, and that's
Oh,
why I
yes.
was asking
Yes.
if we could.
Yes, and
Yeah.
I'll send that org chart out to you all. I mean, it was also presented to the board when they approved the new position so that they could see how they aligned.
Okay,
Yeah, so I can send that out. I'll email that out to everybody after the meeting.
thank you.
And if you'd also like the job descriptions too, for the new jobs, I can include those in there as well.
Thank you.
So now we're going to get,
You mentioned that you are still hiring for the school police officers. For these behavioral health positions, there's so many. Were they difficult to hire for?
This is really exciting. So one of the board's direction to the superintendent staff was they wanted to make sure we hired the right people. And normally, if we added 170 positions to our schools, then the principals are kind of tasked with filling those jobs. But they asked that we do it centrally so that they could be kind of vetted and made sure they had the right skill sets. And so the 170 jobs have been posted. We had over 300 applicants. A good pool of applicants that
From
qualify.
locally or?
I've asked that question, like, where are they coming from? But yes, it's a mix. Some of them are coming from some of the same providers that may be local and some of the co-located services, which may ruffle some feathers. But I guess in that work, it's an attractive position, even at I don't know. We had a very strong showing of applicants,
Great.
so that gives me hope that we'll actually be able to get those filled before school starts.
So other people will have some hiring to do.
Yeah, there may be some domino, but.
So if these positions are being vetted centrally to make sure that people meet the job description requirements and have the skill set necessary, how does that move forward to hiring within schools? Because 5 people could have
Right.
So met the requirement.
Yeah, I should explain
That doesn't mean that they're a good match for each individual school.
No, we create the pool, and we've done this with we did it, I think, with the single school culture facilitators. But we'll develop the pool. There are some of those people that applied they have experience with the school now, maybe as a third party person or whatever. So there will be that latitude for principals if they've got somebody that they know made it into the pool and they've got some history with or whatever.
Well, yeah, the pool is just.
So
the-
ultimately
Final
then,
decision.
principals make the final decision for their school?
Well, the principals then interview from the pool.
From the vetted pool.
From the pool. So as long as they're within the pool, then once the jobs are placed in the school budgets, then they'll be able to advertise them, have the people from the pool tied to them, linked to them or attached to them, and then they would interview them. I mean, that was the process with the single school culture
And I think the way that they explained it to us is as they go through the pooling process, they'll kind of get strengths and weaknesses for each candidate because, like you said, every school is different. So if I need somebody that's got some behavior therapy background because I have a high needs ASD population, that kind of stuff, we can use them in those ways.
So they're still in the process of developing the pool. I mean, they have the applicants, but they haven't vetted them and done all that
That's
yet.
occurring now.
And there's also community involvement with vetting the applicants as well. And that was at the request of the board when they were going through and approving the job descriptions. All right, so are you ready for capital? So now we have capital and debt.
Good morning, everybody. We presented the capital and debt service budget back in January, so this is going to look very familiar to you. At this point, we have balanced the capital plan for the next 10 years. There are still some things, just as Heather explained, the legislative session's not over yet. We don't have property values, and we'll get to those. So this is not the final budget, but we've actually never had a draft of the capital plan done before July, so we're very happy to have it done this early. So at this point, we'll just be tinkering with it and adjusting it as we move forward. So again, all this is going to look very familiar. We've updated everything. The significant enhancements this year is to increase the funding for air conditioners. We'll be borrowing for that, but it's an extra $32 million to replace air conditioners over and above what was in last year's capital plan. We've also increased the funding for computers. We have a lot of units at the district that are running into the end of life for Windows 7 operating systems. So we're going to be we may be borrowing to buy computers. I'd prefer not to do that. And if some of the funding enhancements that we're talking about later come through, what we'll end up doing is buying the computers up front, and then it will reduce the debt service in the year 2 and 3. We've added a remodel in this building for the admin for school police and an emergency operations center that we've not had before. That's about $2.9 million that we're adding into this building. There was a modular addition for South Intensive that's currently in some very, very old buildings. So they're going to get some of the concrete portables we moved in, added covered walkways, and make it a nice facility for them. A modular addition for Sunset Palms Middle School. DOE has not approved the new school that we've requested, but there's a need there. So we're proposing moving the concrete portables in to build a temporary school until DOE does approve it. They will let us build that. It's not as big as the full middle school, but it's a start, and we definitely want to move forward with that. We've also allocated some money for Wi-Fi on the school buses, and that's a two-part project. One part is going to allow the children to have access to Wi-Fi on the bus, and the second part is giving school police online access to view what's going on in the buses. So if there's an incident, they'll be able to view it live. So it'll be Wi-Fi cameras.
Why do you want to give kids more Wi-Fi on the bus?
Well,
I get
we're
the police
piloting
side,
it.
but they're on those phones enough.
We're piloting it now, and there would be firewall protection, so they're not able to just surf the net or web freely. But they're doing a pilot now on some of our longer bus routes, and they found that the kids are better behaved. And kind of quiet.
Just learning all that bad stuff on the
Well, no, but
phone.
we block the bad stuff. It's filtered. And the idea is it gives an opportunity to do some homework and stuff like that as we're going back and forth.
Well, and the truth is, they're probably already on their phones because they don't really need Wi-Fi to be able to do any of that. So,
Yeah. Okay, and the last thing is a significant increase to funding for musical instruments. We've not been able to do that in the past, so it's going from $140,000 a year to $1.5 million a year. So I think we still have room to increase that, but it is a significant increase.
Does that include elementary schools or
It's
just
for all
the
schools.
secondary?
It's all schools.
Okay.
thank goodness.
So this is the list of I'm going to go through each section of the budget. So this is the construction projects. The items in bold are new, so I've already mentioned all of those, except for over on the top right, there's transportation at West Central at Skis Road. That's actually a referendum project, but at the time when we did it, we said transportation at West Central. We didn't know if we'd get permission from the county to locate a new bus depot off Skis Road. So that budget's being split into two projects. We always contemplated doing that. There'll be some money spent on the existing West Central location and money spent to build the new location. So it looks like a new project, but it's always been planned that we would do that if we had approvals. The referendum projects are shown in italics, so we always try to keep an eye on those as well. I'm not going to spend much time on this, but this is the chart that I always show. It just shows the debt service budget that we're in compliance with our policy. We've added in debt service for 2 loans, basically we call them leases. That's just the legal term we have to use for air conditioners and the computers for the next 2 years. Ongoing facility projects. This includes basic maintenance. It includes the facility renewal that was part of the referendum. There was $944 million allocated. At this point, there's a lot of carry forward in those projects. They're all getting started, and they all take 2 to 3 years to complete. So, for example, one of the big projects that's being funded this year is Palm Beach Lakes High School. The work will be done over 3 years. So every year when we budget for it, a lot of it rolls from year to year as we finish the work. We're trying to get that work done when schools are not in session. A lot of it's very invasive into the classrooms. So we have to time it with what works at the schools. Work that can be done when kids are there, we're certainly doing that. But a lot of it, air conditioning replacements, replacing the floors, the furniture, it's very hard to do that when the kids are there. So we really focus on the winter break, spring break, summer breaks. We're getting a lot of work done over those periods of time. Security projects, we at this point have taken the 10-year referendum, and with this year, all the money will be moved forward. We're trying to expedite that work to improve and fix the single point of entry for all the campuses, and also other enhancements that school police is doing, working on cameras and card access to the building. So at this point, we believe we fully funded everything that the school police department has requested. That's an ongoing process. At this point, they're continuing to review our schools, but we believe we fully funded all their needs to make sure the schools are safe. And then technology, as I mentioned before, there's a big increase over the next 2 years for Windows 7 end of life. There is a proposal that's not included in this budget right now, but we're hoping to add it. That would be an extra $4 million a year starting in 2021 that would take us to a 1-to-1 ratio at every school. So with some of the revenue adjustments that may happen at the end of the year, we may be able to plug that in. I know they gave me the numbers after this was printed, but it's an extra $4 million a year, so we're hoping to move forward with that. School buses and vehicles, that really isn't a significant change from what you've seen earlier, and the equipment has gone up significantly because of the increase in musical instruments. Other capital items, property and flood insurance at $87.5 million. This is something we're keeping an eye on. Property insurance is becoming more expensive, and so that may be something we're increasing in the future, but that's the number we have in there for the moment. The reserves, the $334 million, most of it's at the very end, and this is higher than last year because some of the construction projects were moved up before the revenues come into place. So we need to borrow for them, and depending on how we structure, and this is debt issues 7 years from now, we may be able to shift that around and use some of that extra money to pay for some of the school construction projects. So almost all those reserves are all in the last 3 years of the capital plan, and it may all change between now and then. Charter schools, we have $10 to $11 million a year plugged into the budget to fund capital outlay for charter schools. If the legislature funds that, then that's money that can be moved back into the budget to be used for computers and other things. That's where I'm hoping to be able to fund the 1-to-1 ratio from, and also eliminate the need to borrow for computers. Right now, the House is fully funding the capital outlay for charter schools. The Senate is only funding $15 million a year across the state, and they're waiving the district's responsibility to fund it. So it looks like that $10.6 million for 2020 will come back to us. I'm just not counting on it till the legislative session's done. Some of the variables that we're looking at, as Heather mentioned, the tax roll, we don't know what those numbers are actually going to be until usually around June 30th, July 1. The capital outlay that I mentioned. In the capital plan, we also have $17.5 million spread equally across 10 years for PICO construction. The state required that we add that in our capital plan last year, saying the state would provide it. They have not provided this in probably 15 years. I don't think it's going to come to fruition, so I think the budget will be reduced by that amount. I just don't know that yet, so it's still plugged in there being, I'm not sure if it's conservative or not, but that's the number the state's requiring, so I expect that's going to come out. We have some really good news on impact fees. I had it maybe increase. The county commission approved that on Tuesday, a significant increase to school impact fees. So we're really excited about that. Some extra money coming to the schools to deal with growth. And we have all the new schools that are in the plan are for growth. So it will help as we move forward. That's great news. Legislative issues regarding changes to cost per student station, whether or not we have to have DOE approval for funding projects, charter schools, all those things could impact. So as the legislative session wraps up, we'll have better information there.
And that's included in 7070, correct?
It is. It is. For example, right now, DOE would not approve the middle school at Sunset Palms. If we no longer have to get DOE approval, we would go ahead and fund that school, and then we wouldn't need to fund the modular addition at the school. We just build the school. So that would be a savings of $4.8 million right away. So hopefully that moves forward. Additional needs of maintenance. They're having significant issues filling positions. We've got a lot of vacancies, and that if we can't get the positions hired, we'll have to go outside to hire people to bring in outside companies to do that work, which would be an increased cost. So we're working with maintenance to come up with different ways to try to bring people in and hire them. That will be an increased cost moving forward. Now, in our capital plan, starting with year 4, you start to see a pretty significant increase in funding for maintenance. We're trying to make a really solid investment there. As the sales tax referendum goes away, we really have tried to ramp up the percentage of the budget that's moving to maintenance. We're hoping that would cover it. I'm not sure it will, so it's something that we're keeping an eye on. I already mentioned the increase in funding for computers to 1.1-to-1 ratio, and we're hoping to do that. We are dealing with increased construction costs, so those budgets for construction projects, most of which are funded with borrowings, as those costs continue to increase, that's going to be an increase in extra pressure on the budget. And that's being dealt, we're seeing that statewide and nationwide, construction costs are rising. And I always put this bullet in there, the capital budget does look much better, but all the sales tax revenues are dedicated to very specific projects that are overseen by the Sales Tax Oversight Committee. That money can't be used for other projects, so it definitely is earmarked for specific things. With that, I'm going to hand it back to Heather. She got a little break talking.
So next are,
Can I ask a question on the construction budget?
Sure.
I was looking on what is page 3 under modernization and replacement projects. Just looking at the total costs allocated, it looks like there are 4 replacement schools in there. Or I'm trying to understand what is the difference between, say, the 40,000 plus cost for 2 of those schools and approximately 30,000 cost for the other. Does that mean that some of the existing structure is still being used, or?
Well, the budgets are, when we're doing a modernization or a new school, either way, we have to build it within the cost per student station. So the biggest driver is the size of the school. So for example, Verity is being expanded to a K-8, and it's going to be almost 1,500 students, as opposed to O5C, which is a new school that'll be 970 students. So the budgets are built based on that cost per student station formula. It's a different amount and it goes up month by month. So we actually go through and look at the month it's going to open.
So when I see Winbrook and Melaleuca at significantly less cost.
It's smaller number of students. As we move forward and start awarding construction contracts, Then the numbers will be changed based on the number of buildings that will be kept, specifics for that school, but the budgets are built based on the cost per student station number. So it's really driven based
But
on
they're
when
all
the-
going to be total replacement, new schools?
For Melaleuca, yes, the school is, because of the age, it will be completely replaced, but it looks
I
at
have a
school by
particular
school.
interest there, so.
It does depend on the school. There are some schools that, there was an addition added on later.
Right.
And so that building, the state not only tells us how much we can spend on a per-student basis, they also have to approve every project, and they have to look, and they decide whether or not we can tear a building down. So the budgets that we have right now are just based on cost per student station with an escalator for extraordinary costs, such as hurricane hardening, water retention, some of those things that can be tailored to school by school. We have a budget in there. As we get ready to award each of these contracts, and one of the things I'm still going to be doing on these projects is verifying these formulas are being adhered to, that's really what the number is. But as we get closer, they'll have actual cost. They still have to live within the cost per student station number, but the extraordinary costs may go up. For example, the Verity construction project, we're moving the children all off-site to a temporary campus because there's not room on that site to do it, which is what we've done in the past. So we have to move the kids to another site, put in portables for them to live in for a year, and then move them back to their new school. The cost for that is higher on that side. The cost of construction should actually go down because the contractors don't have to worry about children being on site when they're building. So there's back and forth with those. But for the moment, it's just based on the number of students.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions on the capital budget? Okay.
So now, so our upcoming timeline, so we are, I mean, the budget is basically balanced. I mean, we're now just waiting on the legislature to finalize the budget. So we're expecting the conferencing to be next week. The legislative session ends May 3rd. I think it was last year they had to extend it a couple days because they need at least 72 hours in order to vote. So hopefully we end on May 3rd or at least shortly thereafter, and we don't have any further extensions. The board budget workshop is on May 8th, and then our next budget advisory committee is on June 7th. And so the purpose of that meeting is really to recap what you would like to have in the report to the board. So if there's any feedback that you want to provide me prior to that meeting, I'll consolidate that, try to do a draft, and I would, based on the feedback from the committee, I would assume that you would want to focus on, the passage of the referendum and the investments that we were able to make as a result of the referendum. And so if there's anything else that you would still want to see within the budget, make sure that you forward that to me so that I can incorporate that in. And then that would be something for the committee to be able to discuss openly at the next meeting as to what you want to have included within that report to the board. And so we have another tentative meeting on June 13th, and that would be to finalize a report. If we're not able to finalize it on June 7th, we have a meeting scheduled for June 13th, if necessary. Tentative adoption for the budget is July 31st, and final adoption is September 4th. And this is also just an overview, just from the start of the school year. As to, we started this a long time ago, and, I'm already starting to look at, unfortunately or fortunately, starting to, look out to FY21. So do you have any discussions?
The June 7th and 13th meetings, you're thinking 9 to 12, is that?
Yes.
So question, the biggest fiscal impact to this budget would be the having to roll back to 18 for the referendum amendment, or no?
You mean having to share the...
Well, share with the charter schools, but then also, wasn't there a rollback provision to 2018 as part of the legislation that was more concerning to y'all? Is that the biggest area of the budget change, fluctuation? Is that one piece of legislation?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the reason it feels easy this year is because of the referendum?
Yes, is because of the referendum. And so next year, we're going to be back in the same position that the only new funds we're going to have available are going to be from the state, and any realignments and savings that we're able to recognize within the budget.
Just on the schedule, I had a June 4th meeting on my calendar. Did I get that wrong before, or is that moved to the 7th?
Oh, I do have the 4th, too.
Oh, I have it. I think that's a typo from me. So I believe it is the 4th.
Oh, good.
Oh, it is the 4th?
That's what I have scheduled
Okay.
on, that's what I have
That's
on.
what I had on
so
my
My
calendar.
calendar, too.
Oh, I'm glad you caught that.
Yep, yep,
It's Tuesday morning.
yep.
I had a
Okay.
conflict.
Then the 7th is no
Nothing.
longer on the calendar.
I think in our report last year, we were supportive of the referendum, and if there's any changes with any of the legislation that passes, I think that, we would take those kind of positions to, if there's something that the board is moving forward, with lawsuits and different things, I think this committee has been supportive of those. So we'll just see where the legislation ends up and whether there's a statement we should add to it,
Okay.
Right?
Yep.
So.
So that was actually the next discussion item was the report to the board, and it was just saying that I'll need the feedback, and we can discuss that more at the next meeting. I'll give you a draft prior to that meeting. And I have the correct dates on here, so I do apologize.
That's okay.
The next meeting is June 4th, and if needed, the one on June 13th as well. Last year, we did need that second meeting, so that's why I added it, just in case we do, and they're both from 9 until noon, but I don't expect them to last the whole amount of time. Especially this year, this is the one year where we do have additional funds to invest.
Hopefully, the referendum will go on forever. But if not, would we lose those, like the mental health positions and all of that, or we just, I've had the cart way before the horse on this. But somebody asked me who has applied for those jobs, what's going to happen in 4 years if I leave this company and go to the district? In 4 years, what will happen to me?
Well,
4 years is a question mark, you
Yeah.
know? I mean, I suspect we'll be going back to the voters to try to continue it. Because with the political climate, we don't see these monies being really backfilled. But I mean, I think we're fortunate to be in Palm Beach County. We had 72.37% of people support it. And if we do a good job implementing and executing and making use of these dollars, hopefully the public will see the value and continue it.
I'm encouraging them to apply and say, 4 years is, who knows what your life is going to be like in 4 years.
right.
But
Do a good job and.
And we do have an independent oversight committee specifically for the referendum dollars, which will oversee how these funds are spent. And it's not just based on how they're budgeted, but how they're actually expended. So the fact that there's a position that's out there and not filled, that doesn't count. It has to be actual filled positions. And so that committee meets on a quarterly basis and will be reviewing, and you have a representative from this committee. Ms. Brown
I
is
tried to pass it off to someone, but you guys were like, no, it's Jay.
is the representative, and so we have very detailed oversight of how those funds are spent.
Okay.
All right, any other questions?
We're adjourned. Thank you.
So much
Thank you.
easier to budget when you have money, isn't it?
Yeah.
When you don't have money, it's hard.
Nearly foreign to us.